Bang! An enormous cudgel flew through the air and struck the cavalry in the rear. Aya! Several dozen Mutri Great Cavalry and Celestial Wolf Cavalry were struck by the giant cudgel, the enormous impact pulping their bodies and killing them on the spot. With the transaction complete, Cheng Qianli having thrown Chun Bin to Li Sai, the two sides no longer needed to cooperate, and Wang Chong would not let this chance go by. But the one who felt most pressed by this situation was not Wang Chong, but Gao Xianji. "Du silly, where are you going? Leave behind the formation phenomena." Gao Xianji's speed was like that of a lightning bolt, sufficient to make any level of expert gasp in fright. The air boomed as Gao Xianji pursued Du Silly with incredible speed, leaving a long white trail behind him. A 10-sumjiang stream of sword chi cleaved through the air like water as it slashed at Du Silly. Gao Xianji seemed to be set on Du Silly and intent on pursuing him until the very end. A sharp energy was locked onto Du Silly, suffused with a resolve to never stop until the secret to formation phenomena was taken back. Bastard! Du Silly was both shocked and enraged. In the past, he really wouldn't have feared a battle with Gao Xianji, but right now, a single strike would be sufficient to pulverize the paper in his hand. Clashes between experts were decided in seconds, and in this situation, Du Silly didn't even have time to unfold the paper and memorize its contents. Du Silly was also sure that Gao Xianji would never give him this opportunity. "Huashu Huaizong, hurry and help me stop Gao Xianji. Afterward, I'll divide the secret of formation phenomena with your side." Du Silly bellowed as he clutched the paper. He had been only half convinced of the veracity of this last part of the secret to formation phenomena, but now he was 80% confident. If it were not real, Gao Xianji would not be so doggedly pursuing him. This boy is truly easy to swindle. He doesn't even understand the principle that all deception is fair in war. The people of the Central Plains are truly sincere, Du Silly scornfully thought. He was now basically certain that, in this formation phenomena transaction, Wang Chong had not carried out any discussions with Gao Xianji, and had made this decision on his own. If this were not the case, Du Silly would have never had this chance. At this time, Huashu Huaizong had already fled some distance, but when he heard Du Silly's words, he immediately changed his mind. While everyone was retreating, Huashu Huaizong turned and charged at Gao Xianji. Bang! A golden Vairocana Buddha appeared in the air, and then an earth-sundering saber energy cleaved at Gao Xianji. Boom! Saber energy clashed with sword chi, throwing the air and earth in the surrounding 50 zhang into turmoil and creating a series of explosions. This simple collision was enough to buy Du Silly an important moment to catch his breath. "Ni-ai!" His warhorse cried out, and Du Silly picked up speed, leaving behind an afterimage as he vanished into the distance. Meanwhile, the furious Gao Xianji was simply unstoppable, and not even Huashu Huaizong could stop his advance. Whoosh! A terrifying sword chi swept past Huashu Huaizong, shattering the armor on his left shoulder and tearing open a bloody wound. But Huashu Huaizong only creased his brow for a moment, his face showing little expression. It was like Gao Xianji had attacked someone else's arm. "Let's go!" After blocking Gao Xianji for one attack, Huashu Huaizong began to rapidly retreat. Although Huashu Huaizong was weaker than Gao Xianji, if he put all his mind into escaping, not even Gao Xianji could do anything. Lord Protector General does not need to worry about them. Come back! Just when the ashen-faced Gao Xianji was prepared to pursue, Wang Chong came from behind him and urged him to stop. Daluan Ruozhen had already left. He had been present for this transaction, and there was no guarantee that one would be able to gain much more from a continued pursuit. Killing a few Mutri Great Cavalry and Celestial Wolf Cavalry was already quite decent. What a pity! A little bit more and I could have gotten it back. Gao Xianji loathsomely spat as he looked into the distance. Wang Chong would save his subordinate while he would destroy the secret to the formation phenomena. Gao Xianji had not opposed this transaction because he had planned to destroy the paper the moment the exchange occurred. In this fashion, he could satisfy Wang Chong by allowing him to rescue Chen Bin, while also putting a stop to Du Silly's schemes. Alas, a single Huashu Huaizong had made all his plans for naught. "Ha, Lord Protector General, there's no need to worry. Let them go." To his surprise, Wang Chong seemed unperturbed, watching with a smile as Du Wuxia and his men fled. Gao Xianxia turned in shock to Wang Chong. When he saw Wang Chong's smile, his mind immediately buzzed with countless thoughts, and he suddenly seemed to understand. "Heh, Lord Protector General, the transaction is complete. Let's go back first and then talk about it." As if guessing at what Gao Xianxia would ask, Wang Chong preempted him. Gao Xianxia nodded in understanding. After gathering the army and the giant ape, they set off for Talas. In the distance, with Talas no longer in sight and the Tang having stopped their pursuit, Du Wuxia finally breathed a sigh of relief. "Great General, congratulations. To exchange a Tang soldier for the secret of formation phenomena, there can be no more profitable transaction." From behind Du Wuxia came a familiar voice, accompanied by the clopping of hooves. Dalawan Ruozhen, riding upon a highland steed, had caught up to Du Wuxia, and he had a beaming and profound smile on his face. With these formation phenomena, the Western Turkic Khaganate will experience a resurgence, and Great General can reach even greater heights. Thump! This voice made Du Wuxia's heart give a fierce thump. Now that the Tang had ceased their pursuit, the people Du Wuxia wanted to see the least were the Tibetans. "Great Minister's words are too much. I only plan to use it to complete my celestial wolf illusory formation. I certainly don't have such great ambitions." Du Wuxia pretended not to understand. "Haha, our Yusang's great scarlet sun formation also happens to have some flaws that could be filled by the formation phenomena. Perhaps Great General would also allow us to take a look." Dalawan Ruozhen gave a faint smile, but his eyes gleamed with sharpness. Before the exchange with the Great Tang, the Turks and Tibetans had agreed that the secret of the formation phenomena would be shared between them. Now that Du Wuxia had the item in question, he persisted in playing the fool, but Dalawan Ruozhen would not be so easily tricked. "Buzz!" The air turned solemn as Dalawan Ruozhen spoke. Du Wuxia said nothing, but his body clearly seemed to stiffen as he sat upon his pitch-black Turkic steed. Formation phenomena. Du Wuxia had worked hard to finally get this secret from Wang Chong. Although he had agreed to Dalawan Ruozhen's terms, he had been compelled to buy the situation. But for him to actually give it up was easier said than done. "What? Is Great General not willing to give it up?" Dalawan Ruozhen seemed to peer into Du Wuxia's heart, an implied threat in his voice. "Humph!" Cold snorts came from Dalawan Ruozhen's side as Huashu Huaitsong and Dusong Mangpoj suddenly grimaced. The pair said nothing, but both of them pressed their palms on their weapons. The mood instantly became sharp and dangerous. "Du Wuxia, in this exchange we also put in quite some effort. Are you planning to remove the bridge on us after crossing the river and go back on your words?" Dusong Mangpoj coldly said. The air was tense as the Mutri Great Cavalry began to unsheathe their scimitars and point a forest of cold and gleaming weapons at Du Wuxia and his Western Turks. At this same moment, all the Celestial Wolf Cavalry grimaced in rage and began to point their own swords at the Mutri Great Cavalry. Two armies that had been fighting side by side just moments ago were now pointing their weapons at each other. "Ha ha ha!" Just when this tense atmosphere seemed ready to dissolve into a bloody melee, Du Wuxia suddenly laughed. "Great Minister, great generals, what are you thinking? This Du Wuxia is not one who will go back on their words. This is just a scheme of that Tang brat. He wants to use the formation phenomena to sow discord between us. But we don't need to go along with his plans. Dalawan Ruozhen, these are the first 2 sheets of paper. I've already looked them over and memorized them. Take them." Without hesitation, Du Wuxia took the first 2 sheets of paper Wang Chong had given him and tossed them over without a second glance. Huashu Huaitsong and Dusong Mangpoj were shocked at this abrupt move, and even Dalawan Ruozhen appeared slightly surprised. Swish! Although he was surprised, Dusong Mangpoj still reached out and took the 2 sheets of paper. He unfolded one of them and gave it a glance, and his eyes immediately twitched. Although Du Wuxia had not let them see those 2 papers before, he just needed to see the profundity of these words to know that Du Wuxia was not trying to hide anything from them. He had given them the 2 original and unmodified sheets of paper regarding the formation phenomena. This fellow. Even though Dusong Mangpoj was also an illustrious and veteran imperial great general, at this moment, he found it somewhat difficult to fathom Duwu Sili's thoughts. He had just moments ago appeared extremely unwilling, but now he seemed only too happy to help. It was hard to believe that these were the actions of the same person. Great General, it is a pleasure. We are all allies. Be at ease. Once we have read through these 2 sheets of paper, we will return them to Great General, Daluan Ruozan said with a leisurely and relaxed expression. As he spoke, Daluan Ruozan made a subtle gesture with his hand. In the next moment, the air rang with metal as the Mutri Great Cavalry sheathed their weapons. The taut atmosphere instantly relaxed. Haha, that's not necessary. Great Minister can keep them. Duwu Sili chortled, adopting a completely different attitude from before. Duwu Sili quickly finished reading the 3rd paper regarding the formation phenomena and gave it to Daluan Ruozan. Everyone was happy, and a satisfied Daluan Ruozan soon left with the 3 papers regarding formation phenomena. Once Daluan Ruozan and Huashu Huaitsong had left, Shamask finally spoke up. "Milord, the Tibetans barely contributed anything to this effort. Almost all of it has been due to Milord's efforts. Isn't just giving it to them like this too much?" "That's right. In the end, Yu Sang is our enemy," Chechen Benba agreed. "Is not giving them the secret of formation phenomena like raising a tiger?" On this matter, Chechen Benba and Shamask strangely agreed with each other. They were thoroughly confused as to why Duwu Sili had given the secret of formation phenomena to the Tibetans. However, both of them had been raised to follow Duwu Sili's orders to the word, so none of them had said anything while Daluan Ruozan was around. Now is not the time to break relations with the Tibetans. In addition, Daluan Ruozan isn't an easy person to deal with. Didn't you see? If they couldn't get the formation phenomena, Huashu Huaitsong and Dusong Mangpoj were prepared to attack immediately, Duwu Sili said. Shamask and Chechen Benba instantly fell silent. Huashu Huaitsong and Dusong Mangpoj both had astonishing strength as great generals, and they also had the extremely intelligent Daluan Ruozan on their side. This truly was not the right time to turn hostile against the Tibetans. Moreover, the Tibetans had brought far more soldiers than they had. If we have to give it to them eventually, just handing it over will be a little more pleasant, Duwu Sili indifferently said. But Shamask and Chechen Benba wanted to say more, but Duwu Sili quickly interrupted them. There's no need for buts. Do you two really take me for such a fool? That I would truly give them the entire secret to formation phenomena so easily? Duwu Sili coldly asked. Shamask and Chechen Benba were thrown into a daze by these words, but they quickly thought of something and appeared to understand. Although they didn't know how Duwu Sili had pulled it off in such a short amount of time, he had definitely done something to those 3 papers. "Milord is wise," the two said with heartfelt sincerity. Duwu Sili merely smiled and looked in the direction that Daluan Ruozan had left, his eyes shining with wisdom. They had Zhang Liang's schemes, but he had siege ladders. Daluan Ruozan would have never expected that even though Duwu Sili had not touched a single word of the first 2 papers, even handing over the 3rd paper to the Tibetans without hiding anything, Duwu Sili had other tricks up his sleeve. The moment he had handed over the papers, he had used his stellar energy to muddle a few of the crucial words on one of the papers. Although it was just a few words, without these crucial words, the entire meaning expressed through the text would change. Duwu Sili had not been so pleasant and easy to work with for no reason. Daluan Ruozan, I've given it to you already. Don't come looking for me if something goes wrong. Duwu Sili gave a sinister chuckle, and then led his army back to his camp. Although Duwu Sili had very carefully planned things out, he would have never imagined how the situation was actually developing. Tensum Li away, Great Minister, with these papers regarding the formation phenomena, no matter what happens, we at least have something to give to the Tsenpo. After leaving the Western Turkic camp with the 3 papers containing the ultimate secret of formations, Huashu Huaitsong very solemnly passed them to Daluan Ruozan. At this moment, he felt like a great weight had been lifted off his heart. Daluan Ruozan had left the royal capital's prison with tens of thousands of soldiers and all of the Mutri Great Cavalry without receiving a single word of permission from the Tsenpo. Daluan Ruozhen was already a criminal for his defeat in the southwest. His mobilization of soldiers for personal reasons was piling crime upon crime. But with these legendary formation phenomena in hand, everything was different. Huashu Huaizong and Dusong Mangpoj had done their utmost to appear apathetic in front of Du Wuxia, appearing to care little for this secret, but that was merely because they were extremely skilled at restraining themselves. They naturally understood the weight and meaning of the secret to formation phenomena. This was a power that could boost the strength of the entire Yusang Empire. Heh! To their surprise, the Daluan Ruozhen that had appeared so serious and determined in front of Du Wuxia didn't even look at the papers Huashu Huaizong had given him before throwing them to one of his deputies. This was the attitude one would take for irrelevant pieces of scrap paper. Don't dream too much. Huashu. Dusong. The contents of these two papers are simply not as important as the two of you think. Daluan Ruozhen spoke lightly and carelessly, but his words left the two Tibetan great generals slack-jawed and wide-eyed. Ah! Both of them were dumbstruck. Great Minister, you mean that this formation phenomena secret that Wang Chong gave was fake? Huashu Huaizong was flabbergasted. Daluan Ruozhen waved his sleeve as he firmly concluded. It was always fake. How could it possibly be true? But didn't we see the results from practicing the method on the paper? Just 60 celestial wolf cavalry were able to produce formation phenomena after only a little practice. No formation could do such a thing. If it wasn't formation phenomena, it could have never had this kind of power. Dusong Mangpoj objected. Although he had also wondered if those three papers could be fake, he would never have been like Daluan Ruozhen, concluding that they were fake without even looking at them. Correct. All of us were witness to it. Huashu Huaizong agreed. Huashu Huaizong had initially been rather happy to get those three papers from Du Wuxia, but his excitement was all gone now. Moreover, if all of them are fake, then didn't Du Wuxia also get the fakes? Du Wuxia enjoyed playing the pig to eat tigers. He enjoyed acting weak and clumsy. But this was only an act, not the truth. It was difficult to believe that Wang Chong could make a fool of three great generals with so little time to work with. And it was clear from Du Wuxia's reaction that he regarded those papers as real. But Daluan Ruozhen was never one to lie. If he concluded that the formation phenomena were fake, there was an 80 to 90% certainty that they really were fake. Daluan Ruozhen only smiled. Du Wuxia doesn't understand him very much, so it's normal for him to be deceived by his tricks. But haha, I understand him far too well. This isn't our first match. Given his personality, he would never give the secret of formation phenomena to anyone. This was all just wishful thinking on Du Wuxia's part. But the phenomena, Dusong Mangpoj still found it very difficult to believe that the contents of all three papers were fake. This is the clever part of his plan. If my guess is correct, the simplified version of formation phenomena he gave, everything on that first sheet of paper was the real thing. He joined the real with the false. Truly an excellent plan. In this transaction, Daluan Ruozhen had been sitting on the sidelines, coldly and objectively studying the process. In truth, he was rather curious to see just how Wang Chong would deceive Du Wuxia. But Wang Chong's daring had won even Daluan Ruozhen's admiration. But since Great Minister knew, why didn't you warn him? After all, we are currently allies. Huashu Huaizong said with a slight frown. It's not like I didn't want to, but it would have fallen on deaf ears. Daluan Ruozhen shook his head. Du Wuxia wants the formation phenomena too much. If we tried to warn him at a time like that, he would just think that we had ulterior motives. Besides, we have no evidence, so why would Du Wuxia believe us? Huashu Huaizong and Dusong Mangpoj were both dazed by Daluan Ruozhen's words. Both of these great generals momentarily speechless. In the end, Yusang and the Western Turks were merely impromptu allies. Their friendship wasn't very deep, so why would Du Wuxia give up on this deal, simply because of a baseless warning from the Tibetans? Let's go. We'll talk about it more once we return to camp. With these words, Daluan Ruozhen quickly led his men away. Wang Chong, why did you stop me from chasing down Du Wuxia? At the same time, Gao Xianji, Chang Qianli, Wang Yan, Banahan, and all the generals of the Tang army had gathered in the Lord of Talaz's reception hall. Before they even had time to settle down, Gao Xianji had voiced his question. That's right, Lord Marquis, Wuxia is our enemy. With the formation phenomena, he will be even more difficult to deal with. Shi Yuanqing, Banahan, and the other generals all voiced their agreement. In this deal, there was no question that Wuxia had been the big winner. More importantly, the spread of formation phenomena might result in even more terrifying foes. Haha, Lord Protector General, be at ease. This matter is definitely not so simple. With just those 3 papers, Wuxia will never be able to gain the secret of formation phenomena. Wang Chong gave an assured and confident smile. The chattering in the hall instantly died down. Wang Chong's words had at first astonished them, and then they all felt relieved. So you mean, Wuxia only got a fake? Gao Xianji said. His greatest concern for this deal was that Wang Chong would really give Wuxia the secret to formation phenomena, strengthening the Western Turkic Khaganate. But based on what Wang Chong had said just now, he had been overthinking things. The 3 papers that Wang Chong had given to Wuxia were probably all fake. Ha! How could that be? Dalawan Ruozhen was present at this deal, and he's no easy person to fool. Besides, Wuxia himself is also rather difficult to deceive. Wang Chong faintly smiled. He sat across from Gao Xianji, a long table between them. At this moment, he extended a finger and lightly rapped on the table. Wang Chong would never underestimate his opponents, especially a shrewd great general like Wuxia or a wise tactician like Dalawan Ruozhen. If he had tried to fool Wuxia with a fake, Wuxia would have taken the first moment available to kill Qin Bin. Gao Xianji, Chang Qianli, and Shi Yuanqing were further confused by Wang Chong's words, at a loss as to what he was trying to say. So, Wang Chong, were those 3 papers real or fake? Gao Xianji creased his brow and cut straight to the point. The papers were real, as were their contents, but they were not the type that Wuxia was seeking. Wang Chong gave a faint and enigmatic smile. Wang Chong was probably the only one who understood what had actually been happening in that deal. Formation phenomena, this highest level of formation could achieve, were an ancient power that was far more complicated than others imagined. In this history of the continent, there was a period of time where formation phenomena were very widespread. The Central Plains, the Western Turks, and even the Tibetan Plateau were all home to their own unique formation phenomena, all of them exhibiting supreme levels of power. At the level of formation phenomena, one could use the power of the world to strengthen one's soldiers to an inconceivable level and crush one's foes. But after a certain incident, this supreme level of formations and ultimate power completely vanished from the face of the continent. If this were not the case, the Celestial Wolf Great General would have never spent so much time in fruitless research, much less have been so overcome by his desire upon seeing that Wang Chong knew the secret of formation phenomena. In the continent afflicted by the calamity, many people had thought about reviving this ultimate formation strength to deal with the otherworldly invaders. However, from the initial phases to the final reproduction, countless amounts of manpower and resources had been consumed, with countless detours and additions being produced. It was only after gathering the strength of the entire world that the best and most authentic version of formation phenomena was found amongst all the innumerable versions. Wang Chong rapped his finger against the table and confidently proclaimed, "My lord, be at ease. I've taken care of everything. The version that Wuxia obtained was real, but I've made a few small modifications. The more he practices and researches it, the more harm it will do to him and the more it will grind away at his strength. He will never be able to reach the level of true formation phenomena. This is my punishment to him for using the lowly tactic of taking Qin Bin hostage." Wang Chong did not give too much explanation. "Wang Chong, I trust in you." Gao Xianji's eyes flashed, and he asked no more. No matter what Wang Chong had done or how he had done it, everything was fine as long as Wuxia did not obtain the true formation phenomena. This was the only thing he was concerned about. Qianli, Yuanqing, strength the defenses. Ensure that Abu Muslim and Dalawan Ruozhen don't join together and try to stage a comeback. In addition, have the soldiers take a good rest. "Yes, my lord." the pair deferentially affirmed. As the meeting concluded and everyone left, Wang Chong himself prepared to stand up when a familiar voice rang out in his mind. Congratulations to user! For obtaining victory in this phase of the Battle of Talas, you have been rewarded 8,000 points of destiny energy. A golden light flitted into his mind, and Wang Chong instantly felt his body change. His body seemed to get stronger, his cells more bursting with vitality. At the same time, scenes began to flit through his mind. The entirety of the Battle of Talas, from the moment of his arrival to the final retreat, all the scenes of carnage and fighting, flashed through his mind at astonishing speed. The final picture was that of spinning numbers floating over an enormous map of the continent, finally stopping at 4 golden numbers of 8,000. The first phase of the battle has ended. The second phase of battle is about to begin. Warning: user has an extremely high chance of defeat. Warning: user's circumstances are growing increasingly complicated. The true opponent is far from just the Arabs. Mission failure will result in user's obliteration. User must utilize every method available to survive. For the second phase, user will be rewarded with 20,000 destiny energy upon success and deducted 80,000 destiny energy upon failure. User has an extremely low chance of survival. Additional warning: until the final victory is achieved in the Battle of Talas, user cannot retreat. Retreat is death. A mountain cannot hold 2 tigers, and the 2 empires must decide a victor between the 2 of them. Almost immediately after being rewarded for the first phase of the mission, Wang Chong was deluged by messages. His expression momentarily froze in shock. He already found it rather strange that the Stone of Destiny had only announced victory in the first phase after he had rescued Chen Bin. But strangest of all was the information the Stone of Destiny had revealed in its messages. This battle hasn't been won yet? Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil. He had taken control over the behemoths, killed more than half of the Skyquaking army, and also have the elite Arab army. Abu Muslim and Ziyad had retreated more than a dozen li and had none of their former advantages. Wang Chong had believed that, in this state, the siege had been lifted and the battle could be considered over. He had never expected the Stone of Destiny to say that this battle was only just beginning. My circumstances are getting more and more complicated, and my true opponent is far more than just the Arabs. What does this mean? Could it be that the Arabs have more allies? But the Arabian Empire is the strongest power west of the Tsong Mountains, and they've already conquered all the nearby countries. What other allies could they have? This was the most confusing piece of information the Stone of Destiny had divulged. Wang Chong sensed that the Battle of Talas had yet again changed because of his interference, that there was something important that he knew nothing about. But what could it be? As his mind whirred with thought, Wang Chong left the reception hall. Putting aside the matter of the Stone of Destiny for the moment, news of the victory at Talas was quickly sent back to the rear. At this moment, east of the Tsong Mountains, in the city of the western regions closest to Talas, Wuxia. Wonderful! The Arabs have retreated. The Tang have defeated the Arabs. I knew that the great Tang would win. Protector General Gao. Protector General Gao. The disorderly Wuxia was now filled with cheers, countless merchants filling the streets. Moreover, the bandits who had been plundering and stealing, as well as the powers that had hoped to use this opportunity to advance their own plans, began to retreat. Order was slowly restored to the entire city. The Great Tang had operated in the western regions for many years, so it still had some prestige. The Great Tang had defeated a combined army of Arabs, Western Turks, and Tibetans, which meant that the western regions was once more under the rule of the Great Tang. To continue making trouble at a time like this, making an enemy of the Great Tang, was an extremely unwise course of action. Damn it! The Arabs had several 100,000 soldiers, far more than those bastards of the Anshi Protectorate Army and Chishi, but they still lost. What sort of nonsense is this? Truly a pile of trash. In the northwest corner of Wuxia, on the road leading out of the city, a one-eyed and bearded who sat mounted on a stalwart horse, with a long and strangely shaped blade in his hand and a hateful expression on his face. The Tang had ruled the western regions for many years now, and this had been a rare opportunity to finally wreak some havoc. But after such a short amount of time, the godlike governor of Iron and Blood, Abu Muslim, had somehow been forced into retreat. "Boss, what do we do? The Arabs gave us gold and silver to make trouble in the rear. We have to keep it up for at least 3 months. But it's still not time yet." A thin and quick-witted who whispered as he bowed his body. The Arabs had spent a great deal of money to bribe the various tribes into making trouble in the rear. It wasn't every day that one could be paid to steal and plunder, so all the tribes had immediately agreed. There's nothing to be done. Feng Chongqing isn't an easy fellow to deal with. He managed to escape from all the people the Celestial Wolf Great General Duwu Sili dispatched to kill him. Moreover, he's managed to bring some people to his side. It's not to our advantage to make an enemy of him now. After all, Gao Shenji himself isn't easy to deal with. Retreat. As for the Arabs, they only have themselves to blame, the one-eyed man spat out. After taking one more glance at the Anshi Protectorate headquarters and the banner flying above, the man waved his hand and led his men out of Suaya. With the Great Tang's power still extant, they had no other choice than to reluctantly retreat. Wonderful! In the very center of Suaya, countless buildings towered into the sky, and in the very center of this collection of buildings was an estate with sharp and angled eaves, spectacular and magnificent, built in an ancient and refined style. Anshi Protectorate. These words, painted in gold on black, indicated that this place was where the highest authority of the western regions was based. At this moment, Feng Chongqing was seated within this lofty building, his fists tightly clenched in excitement. "Young Marquis, I just knew that you could do it." Feng Chongqing's eyes were red and bloodshot, his expression agitated. Ever since Wang Chong had led his army out of Suaya and over the Tsong Mountains, he had kept a constant watch over the area. After enduring such extreme torment, he had finally heard the news he had waited so long to hear. Although Abu Muslim and the Arabs had not fully retreated, Feng Chongqing still regarded this victory as the best news he had heard in a while. At the very least, the Anshi Protectorate army now had the initiative and was no longer besieged and on the brink of being totally wiped out. "Wang Chong, thank you." Feng Chongqing's heart was bursting with gratitude. Flap, flap. Several hours later, an eagle flew into Qixi. "Lord Marquis! Lord Marquis! Lord Marquis!" All of Qixi roared with cheers, and excited crowds were gathered outside the Protectorate headquarters. Wang Bei and Su Hanshan both seemed very relieved. They had heard nothing of the army ever since it had crossed the Tsong Mountains. But now, they could finally breathe a sigh of relief. "Bring this news to Lady Su." Su Hanshan, riding upon a tall Turkic steed, quickly passed this news to a waiting rider, who galloped back into the headquarters. Within the headquarters, several maids stood nervously beside a wooden door. They were holding cups of tea and bowls of food, and each one of them had a worried expression on their face. Someone attempted to peer through the cracks in the door, but these efforts were in vain. Cough, cough. Intense coughing came from within the room, throwing the maids into even greater consternation. "What do we do? Young lady hasn't come out for an entire day, and the sound is even worse than it was yesterday. If something happens to young lady, One maid's eyes went red at the sound of this coughing, her eyes filled with heartache, but she did not dare to speak too loudly for fear of disturbing Su Qichin. Around her, the other maids said nothing, but their concern was clearly displayed on their faces. In the room were a dressing table, a desk, a bed, and not much else. Su Qichin sat in front of the desk, a mountain of documents in front of her. She was dressed in a thin white garment, her face pale and bloodless, but her eyes remained focused on the documents before her. "Inform the Zhang clan to hurry up with the supplies being sent to Talas. The soldiers of the Central Plains have different habits from people of the Western regions. Although they eat beef and lamb, they can't do it for a long term without some rice. What is the status of the 200,000 war horses? Has the Imperial Court's director of Imperial Horses sent anyone to take them? Has the official reply arrived? In addition, pass on my order to begin recruiting craftsmen in the name of the Qixi Protectorate. Senior Zhang Shouji took many craftsmen with him to Talas, and we still don't know what losses they've suffered. However, the Tibetans or Western Turks could attack Qixi at any time, and we need to fortify the 2 small-scale steel fortresses as quickly as possible. The inscription masters that I previously ordered to be recruited should be escorted to Wuxiang's city of steel. War not only requires craftsmen, but inscription masters as well. We will need their assistance in the future. In addition, supervise the great clans and have them hasten the forging of the weapons. One order after another was issued, some spoken and others written. On the surface, Qixi was under the command of Su Hanshan and Wang Bei, but everyone understood that the soul of the Qixi protectorate was this feeble-looking woman. Although she was a woman, it was Su Qiqin's existence that allowed order and discipline to be preserved in Qixi, so much so that it even had extra strength to assist Feng Chongqing in Anxi. However, Su Qiqin was only getting paler as she issued her orders, and she was clearly ill. Cough, cough. After dealing with half of the documents, Su Qiqin finally could no longer restrain herself and began to fiercely cough once more, her body trembling. Young lady, although the war is important, so is your health. If this continues, not only will your body collapse, but you won't be able to even worry about the matters in the rear. Listen to me. Eat something and rest a while. Little Zhu suddenly spoke from behind Su Qiqin, pounding Su Qiqin's back to help with the coughing, while tears of anxiety trickled down her cheeks. Little Zhu, I don't have time to rest. There are still 100,000 soldiers at Talas, and they are connected to the safety of the countless civilians in Qixi and Longxi. I must have everything taken care of and make sure that their supplies and reinforcements arrive on time. You don't need to worry. I know the state of my body. I can still hold on. Cough, cough, cough. Su Qiqin once more began to cough, this bout even more serious than the last. Reporting. At this moment, a messenger pushed open the door, rushed in, and kneeled on the ground. A letter from Talas. Lord Marquis has defeated Abu Muslim and forced the Arab army to retreat from Talas. What? At these words, master and servant both shivered in shock, joy and delight exploding out of their eyes. Quickly, let me see. Su Qiqin swiftly got up from the desk and walked over to the messenger. Taking the letter, Su Qiqin read through it several times before finally confirming that its contents were true. We won at Talas. We really won. A hint of blood finally returned to Su Qiqin's face in her excitement, and her entire condition seemed to improve, turning away from Qixi, past Longxi, all the way to the flourishing and bustling capital of the empire. Boom! The news of the victory at Talas was like a giant boulder crashing into a lake, sending massive waves through the capital and throwing the court and the city into an uproar. Ha ha ha! Victory! Victory! The Great Tang won! The Great Tang won! The youngest son of the Wang clan really managed to lead the Tang army. Even though he was outnumbered, he managed to defeat the combined armies of the Arabs, the Western Turks, and the Tibetans. I was right. The youngest son of the Wang clan truly is a pillar of the empire. The Great Tang is mighty. His Majesty is mighty. Ha ha ha. All levels of society were rejoicing. When the news that the Tibetans and Western Turks had sent soldiers had arrived, the entire imperial court had been uneasy. Countless eyes had focused on that strategic fortress west of the Tsong Mountains. 2 protector generals and their armies, for different powers participating in this battle. Countless people were affected by this battle. From Qixi to Anxi to the Tsong Mountains, all the soldiers the Great Tang could spare in the northwest had been mobilized for this battle. If Talas were lost, Anxi and Qixi would not be possible to hold, and then all of Longxi would be threatened by the Arabs. For a country west of the Tsong Mountains to be able to have its soldiers threaten a place as nearby as Longxi was a humiliation the Great Tang had never experienced before. However, what worried the imperial court the most was the alliance between Arabia, Yusang, and the Western Turkic Khaganate. This was a powerful alliance that could make anyone lose sleep. But now, the Great Tang had won, and even if this was just a momentary victory, it was enough for everyone to celebrate. Wonderful! Wang Chong, you didn't let this king down. At this moment, in the King Song residence, King Song put down the report from Talas, his eyes glowing with irrepressible pride. King Song had done many things in his life, including supporting the military, doing all he could to back up the border generals, assisting in the expansion of the empire, and executing the empire's strategies against the enemies on its border. In his life, he had also promoted many people and resolved many political crises. When there was war with Goguryeo and the Eastern Turkic Khaganate in the northeast, he had even spent many sleepless nights making preparations so that the crucial supplies could arrive, reviving the morale of the army and salvaging that war. But at this moment, there was no question that the proudest moment in King Song's life was discovering Wang Chong and silently supporting him in the background. I am willing to give my life for the good of the country. Or is it that one should flee in the face of disaster and approach in times of blessing? Wang Chong, you truly are the proud son of a clan of ministers. Your presence is a blessing for both the country and its people. King Song stared at the couplet beside him, his heart awash with relief. I am willing to give my life for the good of the country, or is it that one should flee in the face of disaster and approach in times of blessing? Was a couplet that Wang Chong had hung up in his study. King Song had paid a visit to the Wang clan estate while Wang Chong was gone and had entered his study. Upon seeing the couplet, he had taken it back to his own residence to store it. Whether it was in the War of the Southwest or the Battle of Talas, Wang Chong had always been diligently practicing his ideals as well as the ideals expressed in this couplet. Wang Chong, go. Open your wings and soar into the skies for the great Tang. I will give you all the support I can from behind. No matter how many people try to stop you, I will prevent any of them from blocking your path. King Song turned and looked through the open window. Dark clouds had gathered, within which lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. A storm was about to descend, but King Song's eyes were even more dazzling than the lightning. Putting aside Anshi, Qixi, and the great Tang imperial court, the first battle had come to a close, and the distant Talas to the west of the Tsong Mountains now welcomed a rare moment of calm. The Tibetans, Turks, and Arabs had all retreated several dozen li. With this rare reprieve in hand, the Tang army and the western region's mercenaries began to work at hardening the defenses. The defense lines broken by the behemoths were repaired and set up according to the terrain, no longer forming a simple straight line. Zhang Shouji and his craftsmen also worked to strengthen and complete the defenses of the city of Talas itself. At the same time, they also began to repair the ballistae and other equipment that had been damaged during the fighting. Everyone had their duties, and every day there was progress. Talas seemed peaceful on the surface, but the undercurrent of war was always surging down below. To the west of Talas, 60 li away, a lush forest spanned across the earth. Enormous trees soared into the heavens, each one with a trunk so thick that 2 people would be needed to hug it. West of the Tsong Mountains, where water grew increasingly scarce and the land grew more barren, only one place could be home to such thriving and ancient trees: the Black Forest. There was almost no merchant who traveled west along the Silk Road and did not know of this place. At this very moment, Abu Muslim and Ziyad had encamped their less than 100,000 soldiers here. How is it? Has there been any news from the Caliphate? A voice came out of the Black Forest. Abu Muslim sat upon the remnants of a stone sculpture along the road running through the Black Forest. The Silk Road was a merchant route, and the Black Forest was a place where merchants would often stop and rest. So many merchants had erected statues to various gods for their protection. The majority of these gods were those related to wealth and fortune. As time passed and more people set up statues along the road, this area had transformed into a scenic spot in the Black Forest. Some people would even come particularly to this place to admire the statues. But neither Abu Muslim nor Ziyad was in the mood for such a thing. In this Battle of Talas, 100,000 Arab elites had been killed, the behemoth army had been completely wiped out, and the skyquaking army that the Caliphate had wasted so much effort in gathering had been dealt a severe blow. Most importantly, the favored minister Mazel had been killed. The two were in an extremely depressed mood. From Khorasan to Samarkand, the army of Arab cavalry they had led had been unstoppable, sweeping away all opposition. But at Talas, they had encountered an unprecedented defeat. We've already gotten in touch. Governor Qutayba of Tarsus and Governor Osman of Cairo I have already replied. They have heard of what happened at Talas and have already dispatched their most elite forces. In at most 1 month they will arrive. They are extremely interested in the Great Tang, this power of the East that they have never interacted with before, Ziad said. Governor Qutayba of Tarsus and Governor Osman of Cairo were probably two names that very few people in the countries east of the Tsong Mountains knew, but in the Abbasid Caliphate, their names and the regions they governed possessed thunderous reputations. In terms of status, they possessed nearly the same status as the governor of Iron and Blood Abu Muslim. Qutayba in particular was known as the governor of war. Under his command, the Arab army had advanced by leaps and bounds, crossing the Mediterranean Sea, occupying Tarsus, and even conquering all the way to the Black Sea. Qutayba hungered for war even more than Abu Muslim did. Abu Muslim enjoyed conquest, enjoyed subduing different empires and their peoples, but Qutayba enjoyed war for the sake of war. Wherever there was war, one could find Qutayba. Thus, even though Abu Muslim had never interacted with him very much, when the governor of war whose name made people pale heard about what had happened at Talas, he had immediately agreed to Abu Muslim's request for reinforcements and begun to march his army. As for Governor Osman of Cairo, although his status was inferior to Abu Muslim's, his achievements on the battlefield were just as illustrious. He was a seasoned veteran in combat and had always been very good friends with Abu Muslim. In the conquest of the ancient Khorasan dynasty, the two had fought side by side to crush an old and powerful foe. The two shared an extremely deep friendship. In the original plan, Abu Muslim had intended for Osman to be his reserve army. Once he had conquered Talas and advanced into the western regions, Osman would come up from the rear and join his army in the conquest of the east. But now, after the harsh defeat at Talas, Abu Muslim was forced to alter his plans and call for Osman ahead of time. Abu Muslim grew much more energetic at Ziyad's report. Both Qutayba and Osman commanded elite soldiers and powerful generals. With their reinforcements, Abu Muslim could quickly recover from his losses. More importantly, both Qutayba and Osman were extremely powerful warriors. The three governors working together could thoroughly crush Talas and perhaps even conquer the east in a single swoop. Despite all this, Abu Muslim's thick brows were still slightly furrowed. What did Qutayba say? He never does anything for free. He must have made a request, Abu Muslim said. This? Ziyad hesitated, but seeing the stern look in Abu Muslim's eyes, he finally spoke. Qutayba requests that Lord Governor yield a part of the war zone to him, and he also requests that if we are victorious, he hopes that Lord Governor will yield the equipment quota the Caliph provides to the eastern armies. In addition, he wants the authority to pick 10,000 elite soldiers and officers from Milord's army to follow him as his private soldiers. Ziyad furtively kept a close eye on Abu Muslim's complexion as he spoke. As expected, Abu Muslim turned nastier and nastier as Ziyad went on, the grimace on his face getting worse and worse. Ziyad's voice couldn't help but get quieter and quieter, softer and softer. The East was an undeveloped war zone, home to countless treasures and enemies. Ever since the regions of the empire were divided into war zones, Qutayba had already been eyeing the East. However, the hierarchy of the empire was strict, and no one was allowed to defy the caliph's decrees. Moreover, Abu Muslim was just as callous and brutal as Qutayba, so Qutayba never had a chance to work his way in. Qutayba had clearly seen the opportunity made available to him by the brutal defeat at Talas, and immediately extended his claws. The Black Forest was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Ziyad didn't even need to raise his head to know that Abu Muslim's expression was certainly extremely gloomy. Everyone knew that the East was the governor of Iron and Blood Abu Muslim's exclusive domain. Anyone who made this kind of request would be humiliating Abu Muslim, so Abu Muslim could never agree to such a demand. Okay. To Ziyad's surprise, just when he was prepared to hear a rejection, he heard an expression of approval. "My lord." Ziyad looked up in shock. "My lord, you can't agree to this. If you agree to Qutayba's unreasonable request, my lord will become the laughingstock of the caliphate, and my lord's reputation in the East will also be damaged." Ziyad immediately began to implore his commander to change his mind. Each governor was a proud person. If Abu Muslim agreed to Qutayba's request, Qutayba would always stand above him in the future. Ziad, you don't understand my intentions. Now is not the time to think about individual gain and loss. Both I and Qutayba have underestimated the importance of conquering the East. In Talas, we encountered a foe like never before. Their power far surpasses that of any opponent we faced before. We relied on the Behemoth army and Skyquaking army to conquer so many enemies, including the Khorasan dynasty, but they both failed at Talas. From Khorasan to Samarkand, no empire has ever been able to stop us for so long, much less defeat us, but the Tang succeeded. Abu Muslim sat upon the stone statue, his eyes shining with a sharp light that seemed to see through all the details and secrets of the battlefield. "My lord," Ziad was dazed. He had never seen Abu Muslim like this before. Before Ziad could say any more, Abu Muslim spoke with a firm and unflinching voice. "Let him come. Tell Qutayba that I agree to all his conditions, but I have a condition of my own. He must bring his best soldiers with him." A complicated look flickered through Ziad's eyes before he finally nodded his head. "Your subordinate understands. Besides that, how is the enlistment of militia progressing?" Abu Muslim asked. In this battle with the Great Tang, the Arabs had suffered severe casualties. Abu Muslim was currently severely lacking in soldiers and needed to replenish his forces. Arabia was a militant empire, and this admiration of battle had gradually spread to all the countries it had conquered. Thus, the Arabian Empire always had an excellent way of replenishing its troops, and enlisting militia was one of the important ways this resource could be exploited. Arabs admired martial prowess, so they had extremely high levels of discipline and sense for battle. As long as they were given weapons, horses, and armor, and then put through some teamwork and formation training, they would become excellent soldiers. Using this method, Abu Muslim had always been able to obtain an endless stream of soldiers. As a result, even though he had suffered many losses in this 2-month stalemate with Gao Shenji, his army had only gotten larger, not smaller. This was also an important contributor to the Arabian Empire's ability to constantly expand, conquering so many empires and civilizations in such a short amount of time to become the strongest empire west of the Tsong Mountains. This battle had far more casualties than we expected. The militia available to us between Khorasan and Samarkand have been severely exhausted. More importantly, everyone was watching our battle with the Great Tang. The defeat at Talas was quickly spread around, and many people have begun to shirk enlistment. The number of people we've been able to recruit recently has severely dropped. It will be very hard to recruit many soldiers in the short term, Ziad sternly said. The side effects of the Battle of Talas were far more severe than imagined. They had not only suffered blows to their soldiers and morale, but were now unable to recruit enough soldiers from the rear. This was something neither of them had predicted. Abu Muslim said nothing, but his brows furrowed even more tightly together. "However, your subordinate is not worried about the militia or Qutayba, but about Baghdad," Ziad said, and then fell silent. Arabia was an extremely hierarchical empire. The death of Mazal was even more serious than Abu Muslim's miserable defeat at Talas. For the caliph's favored minister to die under the governor of the East's watch was an extreme dereliction of duty on Abu Muslim's part, a sign of severe incompetence. Judging by the messages being sent from Baghdad, the caliph was thoroughly enraged. All of Baghdad was also in an uproar over Mazal's death, countless nobles, governors, and great generals criticizing Abu Muslim. Although Mazal's reputation in the capital was not very good, no one would choose a moment like this to say anything contrary to the opinion of the enraged caliph. Mazal was not popular, but he had represented the caliph. Many nobles and ministers in Baghdad were currently demanding Abu Muslim's execution, which was very poor news for him. No one knew what the caliph's will was at the moment, but the sword of Damocles would come down eventually. "Ziad, is there any way to seek out information on the high priest?" Abu Muslim suddenly asked. "My lord." Ziad was dazed. He had never expected that Abu Muslim would bring up the high priest instead of worrying about the caliph's rage and his future punishment. Ziad, Mazal was the high priest's disciple. His Majesty favored Mazal as well because of his relationship to the high priest. Thus, from start to finish, the most crucial figure in this matter has always been the high priest. The caliph has said nothing because the high priest has said nothing. The Tang getting control of the behemoths and making them defect at the most crucial moment was the largest variable in this battle. Mazel's death was also tied to this. If we inform the high priest of this matter, perhaps, it will help us endure this disaster, maybe even get us some assistance. The Eastern world has far too many mysteries. Talas is only the beginning. I sense that if we want to conquer the Eastern world, we will need the high priest's assistance. Abu Muslim's words left Ziad speechless. After the severe defeat at Talas, everyone knew that Abu Muslim was facing a calamity, but no one had ever associated this topic with the most enigmatic existence in the empire, the high priest. Besides, the high priest resided high above, his enigmatic nature engendering respect and fear, and normal people never even had the chance to interact with him. But when carefully considered, Abu Muslim's words were not entirely unreasonable. For a moment, Ziad was frozen as his mind tossed and turned in thought. But my lord, the high priest always moves very secretively. He most often appears at the temple, but even the people of the temple don't know where he goes, much less us. Moreover, His Majesty the Caliph long ago decreed that no one was allowed to disturb the temple and the high priest, with execution for those who did. Even the third prince was not able to do such a thing, much less us. Abu Muslim immediately frowned at these words. He knew the incident Ziad spoke of. Back then, the Caliph had treated the third prince extremely well. But one day, this naughty youth strayed into the temple. When the Caliph found out, he had the third prince immediately executed. A prince was a lofty status that had the right to inherit the throne. Nobles, ministers, and governors would have to bow in their presence, let alone the common folk. From this incident, the entire empire knew of the Caliph's resolve, and no one dared to approach the temple. Moreover, 10,000 heavily armored guards had been stationed around the temple. Abu Muslim thought quietly for a very long time, but he was eventually forced to admit that using this method to find the high priest was almost impossible. If it were just a matter of the temple being heavily guarded, Abu Muslim could just force his way through, but even if he did get in, he might still find it difficult to find the high priest. The high priest was far too mysterious. In the last 10 years, he had only appeared 3 times. It appeared almost impossible for him to gain the aid of the high priest. We'll put this matter to the side for now. Let me ask you, what is the status of the Mamelukes? Abu Muslim asked. As he spoke these words, a strange look appeared in his eyes. My lord, the rebellion of the old nobles in Khorasan has been completely suppressed. I have already received word that the Khorasan rebels lost more than 300,000 men. I am confident that they won't be able to stir any trouble for a very long time. In addition, the Mamelukes have already been informed of what happened at Talas. Commander Ibak has sent a letter saying that once he has finished with Khorasan, he will await the arrival of Governors Qutayba and Osman, and travel with them to Talas to assist Lord Governor. Ibak has expressed great interest in this eastern army that can defeat both the Behemoth army and the Skyquaking army, Ziad sternly said. Ziad clearly appeared energized when he mentioned the Mamelukes. In this Battle of Talas, the Mamelukes were a force that should have been deployed in the east, and the Caliph had promised that they would assist Abu Muslim in his conquest, in quashing the formidable powers of the eastern world. But the Mamelukes had been called away to the rebellion in Khorasan, and they never ended up arriving on the battlefield. The loss at Talas was inextricably linked to the lack of the Mamelukes. If the Mamelukes had been available, everything might have turned out differently. At the very least, that force of Wuxia steel cavalry on the ground would not have been so unstoppable. However, even though the Mamelukes are strong in terms of equipment, they can't compare to the Tang Wuxia steel soldiers. Those weapons are too sharp, and even the god armor of the Skyquaking army, the best equipment the Empire could provide, the crystallization of the knowledge of the Empire's best smiths, was still cut through by those Wuxia steel swords wielded by the Tang. I sense that these Wuxia steel swords will become the Mamelukes' greatest weakness. If we don't address this weakness, the Mamelukes will find it very hard to exhibit their full might, Ziad sternly said. Abu Muslim said nothing, but the shift in his expression indicated that he understood the problem. Although they had both been caught up in the intense battle, they had also been keeping a close eye on the battlefield. Although the skyquaking army was no behemoth, it could definitely be considered the number 2 force in all of Arabia. In their plans, the skyquaking army with their formidable armor would have thrown the Tang lines into complete chaos. But when those 5,000 Wuxiang cavalry charged, everything had changed. If they had not seen it for themselves, they would have found it very difficult to believe that the god armor forged by the best smiths of the empire had been so fragile before the Tang swords. Take the information that we've gathered together with the remains of the broken god armor and send them to Khorasan, to Mamluk commander Ibak. Ibak has more capabilities and resources inside the empire. He will have to rely on himself to resolve this problem. I presume that when he sees these things, he will understand. Flap, flap. A black eagle flew with incredible speed through the air, traveling from Samarkand all the way to the strategic town of Khorasan. In this, one could clearly see the advantage the Arabs held in their close proximity to Talas. Abu Muslim's information could arrive in Ibak's hands far faster than expected. Whoosh! From the vantage of the Black Eagle flying over Khorasan, down below, one could see countless tall buildings soaring into the air. From the density and extravagance of those buildings, one could tell that Khorasan was a flourishing economic hub. In truth, anyone who came to Khorasan would be stunned by its magnificence and grandeur. On the Silk Road, this city was known as the Pearl of the West. Countless merchants would come to admire it. They would travel from east to west along the Silk Road, all of them gathering at this final stop of the Silk Road. But at this moment, Khorasan possessed none of its former magnificence. The streets were dotted with piles of corpses, all of them burning and belching black smoke into the skies. The stench of the burning dead filled the air, but the strongest scent of all was the choking odor of blood. From a distance, even the air seemed to have been stained red in many places. Caw! Vultures and crows spiraled over the city, constantly descending to fight for food with the flames. In many places, one could also see ownerless camels and ostriches wandering around. Khorasan, the pearl at the end of the Silk Road, had just experienced a gruesome massacre. The rebellion might have already been suppressed, but the cleanup would last a very long time. Whoosh! In the center of Khorasan, a banner fluttered over an enormous square building of white stone. A black crescent moon was depicted on this banner, exuding a somber aura of extreme cruelty. Anyone who saw it would feel an inexplicable sense of dread. The Mamelukes. In the Arabian Empire, there was no one who did not know the name represented by this banner. Eternal slaughter. Conquest is king. This was the motto of the Mamelukes. At this moment, countless Mamelukes stood tall around the white building. These Mamelukes had tanned and stalwart bodies, their muscles gleaming as if made of metal. Their bodies were tensed with explosive power, like tigers ready to leap into battle. Most terrifying of all was their heavy black armor. This armor was covered in sword marks. The density of these marks was a sign of the intensity of the battle these Mamelukes had fought. The coagulated blood had already seeped into their black armor, turning it dark red, fusing with the killing intent seething off these heavy cavalry. These were warriors who lived for slaughter. They were like devils from hell, not human warriors, and their cold and emotionless eyes could make anyone freeze in fear. Aru! A savage stray dog emerged from a street some 20 zhang away. Suddenly, this savage dog with bared teeth seemed to notice something. It trembled, gave a soft yelp, and fled with its tail between its legs. These were the illustrious Mamelukes of the Arabian Empire. Where they appeared, even the insects underground would take fright. Silence reigned around them. Mamelukes were not guards. They would never stand sentry for anyone. They lived only to kill others. There was only one person who could be guarded by so many Mamelukes. Commander Ibak of the Mamelukes. The Eastern world had an army like this? Putting down Abu Muslim's letter, Ibak gave a slight frown. As an army that existed purely for battle, the Mamelukes were callously trained from a very young age. Thousands of Mamluk youths would battle with each other in a training camp, with only the last one standing able to become a true Mamluk. This cruel training and filtering method had allowed the Mamelukes to develop a reputation as the strongest fighting force in the Arabian Empire. In this world, there were very few opponents worthy of battling the Mamelukes. Countless so-called elites, claiming to be the most powerful soldiers, had eventually fallen under the hooves of the Mamelukes. It was over their corpses that the Mamelukes had developed their reputation for invincibility. Aibak had little understanding of the eastern force known as the Wuxian cavalry, nor had he ever heard of them before, but he had heard of the skyquaking army. The empire had expended a vast amount of resources and effort, using an ancient training method, to create this army of giants. Even Aibak had to admit that the skyquaking army was superhuman. No ordinary soldiers would be able to contend against it. That this eastern army had been able to defeat the skyquaking army, slicing through their armor like they were vegetables, was enough to earn Aibak's attention. The Mamelukes had never feared formidable opponents, but these weapons Abu Muslim spoke of that could slice through metal like mud made him deeply apprehensive. If these weapons really could cut through the armor of the skyquaking army, then they were definitely a threat to the Mamelukes. Based on what Abu Muslim has said, only armor forged from meteoric metal can stop these weapons. But meteoric metal is extremely rare. Where could I find enough to equip my entire army? Aibak slightly creased his brow, a contemplative look on his face. The Mamelukes had never lacked for courage in battle, but they were also not fools. Aibak needed to take the governor of Iron and Blood's words seriously, and he found this problem rather difficult to deal with. Reporting. As he was thinking, hurried footsteps interrupted his thought process. Bastard! Didn't I tell all of you not to disturb me right now? Aibak harshly rebuked. Have those Khurasan scoundrels started up yet another rebellion? The Khurasan rebellion had left the entire city drenched in blood and carpeted with corpses as the Mamelukes put into practice Aibak's cruel suppression methods. Just burying 300,000 corpses took a great deal of time, but Aibak had always been one to pull out evil by the roots. It was inevitable that one would bring up some dirt when pulling out radishes, but since the old nobility of Khurasan had rebelled, he needed to ensure that all their influence was exterminated. Commoner or noble, intentional or unintentional, involved or uninvolved, anyone who had any relation to a rebel was executed together with their family and relatives. These 300,000 deaths were only the beginning for Aibak. Thus, the people of Khurasan were in a panic, and people were constantly paying him a visit, pleading for the Mamelukes to stop and end their search. There were even some Arab nobles and officials amongst these people. This was also why Aibak had particularly ordered that no one was allowed to enter his room for a certain period. "My lord, that's not it. Someone who is not from Khurasan. He is very special. He wanted me to bring this to my lord and said that my lord would immediately recognize it." The messenger looked away from Aibak's murderous gaze and took out an object from his bosom. Bastard. Aibak was just about to begin another round of cursing when his eyes suddenly fell upon the object in the messenger's hand. His pupils suddenly constricted as if he had been given a sharp jab. This was an ancient bronze token, speckled with blood. It appeared to have experienced many disasters and seemed to have many stories to tell. But rather than this, what had truly caught Aibak's attention was the golden sun emblazoned upon the token. The Founder's Token. Aibak's body froze in shock. This bronze token was very similar to the token Aibak possessed that symbolized his authority over the Mamelukes. The only difference was that Aibak's token depicted a black crescent moon, while this bronze token depicted a golden sun. But despite this difference, any of the Mamelukes would recognize this token. This was because this was the token used several hundred years ago by Qutuz, the founder and first commander of the Mamelukes. Within the Mamelukes and throughout Arabia, this founding commander Qutuz from several hundred years ago still enjoyed a magnificent reputation. Even now, many people attempted to imitate him, and he was hailed as a hero of Arabia. No one could shake his status. There were many legends as to why Qutuz had created the Mamelukes. But amongst these legends, there was one that was most widely accepted and believed. It was said that Qutuz was a mercenary of the Arabian Empire who ended up being imprisoned and enslaved after a defeat in battle. By pure coincidence, he caught the eye of a certain person who took him out of the prison and restored his status. At the same time, this person taught him a formation, the same formation that the Mamelukes used now. In the legend, It was said that Qutuz had also created the first generation of Mamelukes with the help of this person. Out of gratitude, Qutuz had a special token forged. The golden sun on this token represented Qutuz's agreement with that person. This token was the founder's token of the Mamelukes, but not longer after it appeared, it disappeared. No one knew where it had gone. Ibak had never expected it to appear now. "Where is he?" Ibak suddenly said. The messenger lowered his head and solemnly replied, "In the courtyard in the back." Ibak felt his curiosity piqued. The matter of Talas was pushed to the back of his mind as he strode to the back courtyard. In the rear courtyard of the white square building, Ibak saw the person the messenger had mentioned. This person was thin and extremely tall, and the black robe draped over his body made him seem extremely mysterious. Several large carriages were parked behind the man. These carriages were several times the size of normal carriages, the wheels taller than the average man. The carriages were entirely shrouded in black cloth. There were nearly 20 such carriages, some of them even parked outside. "Just who are you? Why do you have the Mamelukes founder's token?" Ibak coldly asked, wariness in his eyes. These people had appeared far too suddenly. Qutuz's token had always been a great mystery. Even though Qutuz had decreed in his will that anyone with this token could command the Mamelukes and carry out the agreement he had made in his place, no one had ever been able to identify the other party of this agreement. Ibak did not dare to relax his guard. "Haha! There is no need for Milord to be nervous. It is fine for you to have misgivings about us, but even you should be able to recognize this." The tall and thin man smiled as he raised his sleeve, revealing a string of tadpole-like letters on his wrist. These divine runes circled his wrist like a bracelet, and in the very center of them was the image of a golden eye. The temple. In a flash, Ibak lowered his head, his mind surging with mighty waves. The temple possessed supreme authority in the empire. It represented God in heaven and the caliph of the empire. The members of the temple did not lightly leave Baghdad, nor did they recklessly interact with outsiders. Ibak had never imagined that a priest of the temple would appear in Khorasan. So it was a venerable priest. This Ibak was too rash. "What order has venerable sir come here to deliver?" Ibak deferentially said. "Haha, it is not me who has an order, but the high priest. He knows that Lord Ibak has encountered difficulties and has sent me to bring gifts to Milord. In addition, the founder's token of the Mamluk army is not mine, but the high priest's." The thin man in black grinned. "What?" Ibak's body trembled in shock, his eyes going wide as he raised his head. The high priest was the owner of the Mamelukes founder's token. Countless thoughts flew through Ibak's mind. He suddenly recalled Qutuz's last words. Could it be that the mysterious person who had helped Qutuz establish the Mamelukes was the high priest? That was far too shocking. But even so, Ibak had an even greater question in his mind. The high priest was a supreme existence of the empire that no one could compare to, no one could offend. Although Ibak was the commander of the Mamelukes, he was insignificant compared to the high priest. Ibak had never met the high priest, nor had they ever communicated with each other. Ibak was truly puzzled as to why the high priest would send someone to him, and even have them come with gifts. "Venerable sir, what gifts has the high priest bestowed? And did the high priest say anything else?" "Haha, Lord Ibak, there's no need to ask anymore. Just look, and you will naturally understand." The tall and thin priest gestured behind him. Whoosh! A burly and muscular man standing next to a carriage suddenly pulled the enormous black cloth off the carriage. In a flash, all the surrounding soldiers turned to look, Ibak being particularly attentive. This. Even though Ibak had prepared himself for every possibility, he couldn't help but shudder when he saw what was on this carriage, his mouth dropping open in shock. Under the light of the scorching sun hanging high over Khorasan, Ibak could clearly see that this carriage had been loaded with an enormous metal ball, its surface mottled and uneven, taller than 3 men. Meteoric stars. The carriage in front of Ibak was loaded with enormous and complete meteoric stars. This was the first time Ibak had ever seen one in such a well-preserved state. The vast majority of meteoric stars would burn fiercely as they plummeted from the skies. By the time they hit the ground, they would just be irregular remnants, which were what was known as meteoric metal. For their original state to be maintained even after landing was incredibly rare. Most importantly, any Arab smith understood that a perfectly preserved meteoric star could serve as the best forging material with the highest efficiency. This kind of meteoric star could be forged into large numbers of meteoric metal armor of the finest quality. If there were 17 to 18 carriages with such things, could it be? At this moment, even someone as cruel and callous as Ibak couldn't help but swallow. To the Mamelukes, this number of meteoric stars was unquestionably an extremely valuable gift. But how did the high priest know I needed meteoric metal? As this thought flitted through his mind, Ibak thought back to the thin priest's words and suddenly felt an intense fear and respect. He had only just received Abu Muslim's letter, but the high priest seemed to have predicted this and had sent these meteoric stars ahead of time. Such a being was truly unfathomable and worthy of reverence. But Ibak did not continue on this line of thought. No one who attempted to predict the movements of the high priest had a good ending. "Milord, these carriages?" Ibak hurriedly raised his head and began to speak his thoughts. "Ha ha ha! Correct. These 17 carriages all have meteoric stars. This is the high priest's gift to the Mamelukes. This is only the first batch. The second and third batches are already on the way and will arrive at Khorasan soon. With armor made from this, the Mamelukes will definitely rise to a new level of power and produce even more dazzling accomplishments. In addition, the high priest has also provided a powerful formation to assist the Mamelukes on the battlefield." As the tall and thin priest spoke, he once more gestured behind him. Whoosh! The black cloths on the 17 carriages were pulled off. As expected, each of them was loaded with pitch-black and spherical meteoric stars. Impossible! Although he had already predicted it, the sight of these 17 meteoric stars on the 17 carriages was still an enormous shock to Ibak. The frequency of meteoric star landings was already very low, so finding one was quite good, let alone 17. Moreover, to find one perfect meteoric star amidst 1,000 landings was amazing. But there were 17 before his eyes. This had already surpassed common sense. No one except the high priest could be capable of such a feat. "What request does the high priest have?" Ibak asked. Visits and gifts were not made for no reason. The high priest had never met him before, yet he had gifted him meteoric stars and a powerful formation. Ibak did not believe that such things would be given without condition. "Ha! Milord is wise." As expected, the black-robed priest chuckled and explained. "Lord Ibak can take all these things, but the high priest has one request, and this request does not conflict with Milord's objective. A young commander has appeared at Talas. This is the high priest's target. He hopes that Lord Ibak can take this commander's head and send it to the temple." Ibak was at first dazed, and then he understood, and finally he was relieved. "Please tell the high priest that Ibak swears on his life that he will fulfill the high priest's desire." The severe defeat at Talas was like a boulder crashing into the lake of the Arabian Empire. And with the high priest's intervention, the course of the entire war began to veer off into unpredictable territory. But one thing was certain. Not only had this defeat not damaged this vast empire's will to battle, it had only further provoked it. Countless soldiers were now gathering in Khorasan, ready to advance to Samarkand and then to the Black Forest, and the stench of war could be smelled everywhere. Meanwhile, to the east of Talas, some 60 li away, the atmosphere was much more mellow. The first battle had concluded. Whether it was the Great Tang, Arabia, Yusang, or the Western Turks, all sides had suffered severe casualties. Each party needed some time to rest and recover from the injuries of battle. While the Great Tang was rebuilding its fortifications and hardening the city, Daluan Ruozan and Duwusili were also welcoming a period of peace. Flap, flap, an Arabian hunting falcon flew down from the sky and into Daluan Ruozan's tent. What did Abu Muslim say? Daluan Ruozan was kneeling in front of a table, his head lowered over the map of the continent as he spoke. "This is Abu Muslim's 17th letter." On the other end, Huashu Huizong had taken the letter from the hunting falcon. After glancing over it, he closed it. It's the same as the last one. He hopes that we can continue to hold the east and cut off Wang Chong's path of retreat. It seems that Abu Muslim doesn't trust us very much. Haha, we were spectators to the last battle, so Abu Muslim naturally has a poor view of us. That he didn't curse and berate us in his letters is already very courteous of him. Daluan Ruozan softly chuckled. He lowered his head and continued to study the map before him. But he can't blame us for that, Huashu Huizong argued. Until the third wave, Abu Muslim didn't even send out his own troops, so we certainly couldn't. Moreover, the day before, we had just devoted all our strength and suffered even greater casualties than he had. As for later on, the Arabs had won the battle. Who could have expected the situation to reverse so quickly? The Tang had 4 behemoths under their control, so if we charged in then, we would just be delivering ourselves to death's doorstep. How could he blame us for our actions? This battle had been far too unpredictable. Neither Huashu Huizong nor Daluan Ruozan had hoped to see it turn out like this. Ha! Daluan Ruozan couldn't help but sigh at Huashu Huizong's words. You can't blame Abu Muslim for this either. We truly miscalculated. That person's division of the battlefield proved effective in the end. All this might have been unexpected for us, but to that person it was probably inevitable, Daluan Ruozan said. If not for Wang Chong's 2 steel defense lines, the Turco-Tibetan army would have joined together with the Arabs long ago and completely surrounded the Tang. The battlefield would have never turned out as it did, where one side attacked while the other could only act as a bystander. The effects of Wang Chong's division of the battlefield initially had not been obvious, but no one could ignore them now. Send Abu Muslim a letter. In a polite way, tell him that no matter what, we Tibetans and Western Turks will hold the eastern line and not allow the Tang to leave. This? Huashu Huizong hesitated a moment before finally giving a nod. Fine. That's right. How is Wuxia doing? Daluan Ruozan suddenly changed the topic. This question seemed to relax the mood in the tent, and a rare smile appeared on Huashu Huizong's lips. Wuxia has completely lost himself in formation phenomena. Ever since that day, he has put everything into cultivating in the hopes of bringing his celestial wolf illusory formation to the highest level. Huashu Huizong faintly smiled. Even though they still hadn't identified the flaw in the version of formation phenomena that Wang Chong had given them, all the elite Tibetan commanders knew that this version was fake. Thus, even with it in hand, no one had read nor cultivated it, and everything was peaceful. But their allies, the Western Turks, were different. 20 li away, their camp was a hive of activity. Countless soldiers were shouting and sweating as they galloped to and fro. This compared to the Tibetan camp was like a different world. Haha! Once he realizes that something is wrong, Wuxia will stop himself. Daluan Ruozan chuckled. I truly can't understand it. Wuxia is a famous great general, one of the strongest around. How can he not notice such a simple trick? Huashu Huizong shook his head. There was no such thing as an inexperienced or ignorant great general. The thought that Wuxia was considered one of the best great generals made the situation even more confusing. A horse can stumble and a human can make mistakes. Even though Wuxia is an imperial great general, that doesn't mean that he can't make an error. As allies, we should still send him a letter telling him to take caution. In addition, send someone to observe the Western Turks and see what exactly they are doing. Daluan Ruozan lightly smiled. In truth, he was rather curious to see what they had managed to produce from this fake formation phenomena document, that they were still happily working away at it without a moment of rest. Yes, I will handle this matter. Huashu Huizong gave a knowing smile and left the tent. Gallop! A few moments later, a horseman rode out from the Tibetan camp, traveling the official road around 20 li to the east. Once he crossed the hill ahead, he would be greeted by the wide and open plain home to the Western Turkic camp. Boom! Before he could even approach, he heard a clap of thunder. The horseman glanced upward in confusion and saw nothing but clear skies. It did not seem like there was a thunderstorm coming. What's going on here? The horseman was so surprised that he inadvertently pulled on his reins and slowed down. Are my ears playing tricks on me? The Tibetan horseman quickly came back to his senses and began riding toward the hill. Urging his horse on, the horseman quickly reached the top of the hill. Ha! Before the Tibetan horseman could see what was going on, he heard a mighty roar, one made by thousands upon thousands of men shouting in unison. The horseman was stunned as he began to survey the scene. On the plain extending several dozen li before him, the tens of thousands of Western Turkic cavalry had formed a whirlpool of steel. Charging back and forth across this region, they bellowed as they shifted formations, all merging into a single whole. On their perimeter, the countless wolves were howling and running with them. As all these men and wolves ran together, an enormous aura exploded from their bodies and into the heavens. This powerful aura was almost tangible, like an enormous hand had gripped the air and begun to twist and contort it. Even with his vantage point on the hill, this horseman had no idea what was going on. How could this be? The horseman was given a fierce shock. Not long ago, when he had last come to see what was going on, he had seen none of this aura or energy. The tens of thousands of Western Turks had been running around, drenched in sweat, as if they were all idiots. But on this scouting mission, he had never imagined that he would see this. Just what happened? So little time passed. So how did they get this strong? The horseman's eyes were filled with disbelief. At this point, everyone on the Tibetan and Western Turkic sides knew about the matter of the formation phenomena. After all, the thousands of Celestial Wolf Cavalry and Mutri Great Cavalry had been witnesses to the exchange. But while the Western Turks had been brimming with excitement, the Tibetans had been much more muted in their reaction. Privately, many of them had speculated that this version of formation phenomena was most likely a complete fake. The reason was simply that the great minister was far too calm. Even though Xianxia had also received the secret of formation phenomena, the great minister had not propagated it or even shown any intention of cultivating it. If it was real, such a thing would have been impossible. But it was far from over. As he looked farther above the twisted and contorted air hovering above the Western Turkic army, the horseman saw a sight that he would find hard to forget. 1,000 meters over the Western Turkic soldiers, countless clouds had gathered. These clouds were surging like enormous pythons, blocking out the sun and casting a dark shadow over the earth. Moreover, deep within the clouds, the horseman could see flashes of lightning shuttling and exploding. The explosion he had heard just moments ago had clearly been caused by this lightning. The constant shifting of this lightning seemed to be resonating with the Western Turkic cavalry down below. Formation phenomena. The horseman's jaw dropped, and it appeared like he had been struck by a lightning bolt. He had once overheard his superiors mentioning that the Western Turks were too greedy, not even determining if what they had obtained was real or fake before cultivating it, and that it had a high chance of harming them. But the Western Turks clearly seemed to have become more powerful, and there were formation phenomena in the sky above them. What was going on? What he had heard was completely different from what he was seeing. There's a problem. Perhaps the great minister's judgment was wrong, and that version of the formation phenomena was real. Whatever the case, I must report this to the great minister. With no time to think, the horseman turned around and galloped back the way he had come. What? The Western Turks have gotten much stronger while cultivating the formation phenomena. The great generals of Xianxia and Daluan Ruozhen were all stunned by the scout's report. Great minister, this matter is beyond doubt. The scout was our best one who has taken part in hundreds of battles of all sizes, including the battle between King of Generals Witadra Konglo and the great Tangs Wang Zhongxi. He would not make a mistake here, a vanguard officer solemnly said. After receiving the scout's report, he had immediately noticed a problem. Before reporting to Daluan Ruozhen, he had cautiously sent out some of his best scouts to verify the matter, but all of them had reported the same thing. Daluan Ruozhen, Dusong Mangpoj, and Huashu Huaitsong all glanced at each other in speechlessness. Great minister, this can't be. Was that boy this foolish? He gave Duwu Silly the real thing, Huashu Huaitsong said, his brows deeply furrowed. Daluan Ruozhen said nothing, but there was a pensive look on his face. This matter is not completely impossible. The people of the Central Plains emphasize sincerity with no consideration for time and place. At times, they even make severe errors through their adherence to these conventions. Although Wang Chong is an incredible strategist, he's still very young. He might have really handed over the real formation phenomena for the sake of sincerity. Moreover, didn't Gao Xianxia try to destroy those papers? Perhaps not even they had imagined that we would end up getting the formation phenomena. Dusong Mangpoj suggested after some thought. He had been strengthening the defenses and managing the army when he had heard what had happened and rushed over. It was clear that no matter what the truth was, this matter was very different from what Daluan Ruozhen had predicted. Impossible! Daluan Ruozhen muttered to himself, his brow even more tightly furrowed than his two colleagues. All of you underestimate him too much. He might be younger than all of us, but his intelligence, strategies, and cunning far surpass ours. He would never make such a low-level mistake. But Wuxia truly has managed to produce results from the version of formation phenomena he has. Facts do not lie. If it were a fake, it would have never produced such an effect, Dusong Mangpoj said. Daluan Ruozhen fell silent. Other than his defeat to Wang Chong in the southwest, Daluan Ruozhen rarely questioned himself. But Daluan Ruozhen was forced to admit that he might have made an error of judgment in this case. Go! Let's see for ourselves. On the outermost perimeter of the Western Turkic camp, Daluan Ruozhen, Huashu Huaitsong, Dusong Mangpoj, Huaba Senji, and several other Tibetan generals had gathered. The twisted space and the roiling thunderclouds had left them speechless. Even Daluan Ruozhen felt somewhat uncertain. Great Minister! As Huaba Senji said these two words, everyone instantly focused on Daluan Ruozhen. Although none of them said anything, their meaning was obvious. Reality was right before their eyes. After getting those 3 sheets of paper from Wang Chong, Wuxia had really managed to create formation phenomena, and even his celestial wolf cavalry had gotten stronger. If this was all fake, then nothing in the world was real. At this time, even Huashu Huaitsong, who had always followed and firmly trusted in Daluan Ruozhen, had nothing to say. Eventually, however, he decided to speak up for Daluan Ruozhen. We must think very long and hard about this matter. I trust that Great Minister's judgment is correct, Huashu Huaitsong said. Huashu, you don't need to speak up for me. Daluan Ruozhen bitterly smiled. The facts are arrayed before us. Wuxia truly has gained some benefit from all this, and it's no wonder the Western Turks are drilling night and day. Perhaps we had Wuxia wrong from the beginning. His conduct is not entirely unreasonable. Then, Great Minister, should we also begin to drill? Huaba Senji asked, clearly itching to act. Daluan Ruozhen had the papers recording the method to create formation phenomena. If the content was fake, Huaba Senji didn't care and wouldn't even give them a glance. But the Western Turks had their Celestial Wolf Cavalry and the Tibetans had their Mutri Great Cavalry. If the Celestial Wolf Cavalry could boost their strength by putting into practice the formation phenomena method, then so could the Mutri Great Cavalry. As the highest commander of the Mutri Great Cavalry, Huaba Senji could not help but consider his options. Dusong Mangpoj and Huashu Huaitsong frowned, but they said nothing and looked to Daluan Ruozhen. Wait a little longer. Let me think about this, Daluan Ruozhen said. He rarely encountered difficulties, but this time, he was forced to admit that he found this choice somewhat difficult to make. As Daluan Ruozhen observed from the distant hill, a Western Turkic scout ended his surveillance and traveled through most of the Western Turkic camp to report to Wuxia. Great General, Tibetans have been discovered in the distance. Should any countermeasures be taken? The scout deferentially asked, dropping to one knee. Ha! Daluan Ruozhen? Wuxia faintly smiled, shooting a glance at the distant hill before giving a nonchalant shake of the head. Let them do what they want. They won't get anything from it. Wuxia naturally knew what Daluan Ruozhen and the other Tibetans were thinking. Daluan Ruozhen had treated Wuxia as far too simple a person. With regards to this formation phenomena, Wuxia had been even more cautious than Daluan Ruozhen. War was about deception. How could he possibly believe in 3 sheets of paper that Wang Chong had casually tossed at him? Absurd. If Wang Chong had given him a real first half and altered or faked the second half, Duwu Silly would have fallen into a trap. Given Duwu Silly's reputation and status, he would be made a laughingstock if the matter got out. Thus, from the moment he obtained the formation phenomena, he had picked out a group of soldiers to practice according to the methods laid out on the papers. If it was fake, had no effect, or had some side effect, Duwu Silly would immediately stop them. At the most, he would lose just a few hundred soldiers. But if it was real, everything would change. Duwu Silly was confident that something that was worthy of Anshi war god Gao Xianji throwing himself into the fray could not be something as simple as a few faked words. Daluan Ruozhen, you were too cautious. Duwu Silly faintly smiled, a sharp light in his eyes. He and Daluan Ruozhen had two completely different styles. Daluan Ruozhen was so cautious that he never even considered some possibilities, causing him to lose out on many opportunities. But Duwu Silly was an extremely discriminating and meticulous schemer. He did not make actions blindly, nor did he give up on any opportunity. He made all his judgments based on the results. Duwu Silly quickly cast Daluan Ruozhen to the back of his mind. How are Shamask and Chechen Benba doing? Have all the soldiers been inspected? Has anything strange been noticed? I need to know every detail. The slightest discomfort must be reported to me at once. He stared at the captain of his guards, his eyes grim and cautious. Great General, we carefully inspected each soldier 6 times. Everyone is normal, including Generals Shamask and Chechen Benba. The formation phenomena have boosted everyone's strength, solidifying and focusing their cultivation without any side effects. The guard captain next to Duwu Silly deferentially said. The Western Turkic camp appeared a hive of activity, but everyone was actually extremely cautious. All the elite experts and the shamans accompanying the army, even Duwu Silly himself, were constantly observing the army's condition. The slightest sign of activity would be reported back to Duwu Silly. But it was increasingly evident that they had been too cautious. There was simply no problem with those 3 papers regarding the formation phenomena. Very good. Duwu Silly gave a long sigh of relief, a gratified smile appearing on his lips. He had finally received a return on his investment. At this moment, he had obtained the solution to the formation phenomena that he had been seeking for more than half his life. Starting from now, the entire Celestial Wolf Cavalry, and even the Western Turkic Khaganate would take a completely different form. Now, it's time for me to begin cultivating. With a faint smile, Duwu Silly turned around and headed back into his tent. Gallop! As Duwu Silly was returning to his tent, no one noticed that in the complete opposite direction from Daluan Ruozhen, a fully armored Tang horseman riding a Turkic steed was also keeping watch on the Turkic camp. After giving one last glance at the Turkic army and the roiling clouds overhead, he turned around and galloped off. I must report this to Lord Marquis as quickly as possible. In the blink of an eye, the horseman had vanished without a trace. Now that Zhang Shouji and his nearly 8,000 craftsmen had finished their repair and reinforcing work, the lofty and imposing Talas was now free of the scars of battle. The city walls and the myriad Rakshasa earthen stronghold formation underground had fused together, making it even more bold, grandiose, and invincible. In this field, Huang Batian and the earth element warriors from Wuxiang village had played an important role. They had used their earth element abilities to guide the surrounding origin energy of the world into the formation, refilling its energy reserves and making it even hardier. Outside Talas, after several days of non-stop work, the 2 steel defense lines had also been renewed. In addition, taking in the lessons of the first battle, Zhang Shouji had added many sharp spikes outside the walls to make them even more difficult to attack. In addition, Zhang Shouji had assembled a team of craftsmen to pour large amounts of molten iron onto the bases of the walls. Once the iron cooled, the steel walls became even more sturdy and unshakable. Meanwhile, the Tang army continued to drill and practice within the 2 steel defense lines, prepared for an imminent battle. But at this moment, Wang Chong was not within the steel walls. In a distant place, Wang Chong was seated alone on a large boulder. Wang Chong looked ahead and muttered to himself, "It seems like this is the end." Whoosh! The plains were quiet. with the only sound being a loud and ragged panting. Across from Wang Chong, an enormous being was splayed out on the ground. If one were not there to see it with their own eyes, they would find it very difficult to believe that this was the fierce, despotic, and invincible giant ape. The giant ape's eyelids were drooping, and the cruelty and brutality in its scarlet eyes had been replaced with listlessness. Its huge body seemed to have been drained of strength, and it exuded an air of fatigue as it lay on the ground. More importantly, the giant ape's once boundless vitality had greatly dimmed. It was like a candle flickering in the wind, to be extinguished at any moment. Around 5 days had passed since the end of the battle. The giant ape had lived much longer than Wang Chong had expected. It was a powerful, intimidating force. Every day the giant ape survived was another day the Tang could use to prepare for battle. Another day that the Tibetans, Western Turks, and Arabs would have to tread lightly. Wang Chong had used every method at his disposal to extend the giant ape's life. He had placed the giant ape in this plane far away from Tala's and withdrawn his psychic energy, returning control to the giant ape. In this way, the giant ape would not continue to suffer damage from psychic energy and also would not harm the Tang army in Tala's by acting on its nature. But even so, the withering and decay of the giant ape's brain could not be stopped. At the start, when the giant ape had regained its consciousness, it had pounded its chest and roared into the heavens. But now, even when not under the control of Wang Chong's psychic energy, the giant ape just quietly lay on the ground. It had lost all of its vim and vigor. Wang Chong knew that the giant ape was about to die. Whoosh! The giant ape gasped, and as its scarlet eyes fell upon Wang Chong, they seemed to contain a hint of emotion. Wang Chong could not help but feel a ripple of emotion himself. Even though the giant ape was just a beast and did not have the intelligence of a human, after he had fought alongside this giant ape for so long, it was impossible for Wang Chong to not feel some affection for it. Time slowly passed, and after some time, the unmoving giant ape looked at Wang Chong and gave one last growl before falling eternally silent. Wang Chong sighed and walked forward, his right hand reaching out to close the behemoth's eyes. Goodbye! A hint of gloom flitted through his eyes. The giant ape was truly dead. The plains were silent, and nothing could be seen other than a rock eagle spiraling in the air, vigilantly watching his surroundings. But Wang Chong didn't need to turn his head to know that several thousand zhang away, several pairs of eyes were silently watching this place. Those were the Arab, Tibetan, and Turkic scouts. Ever since the end of the battle, the three sides had been constantly dispatching scouts to watch the giant ape and await its death. Wang Chong knew that as long as the giant ape maintained this unmoving posture, the three sides would need some time to realize what had happened, time that the great Tang could use. Gallop! As he was thinking, the rock eagle in the sky suddenly called out. The three scouts in 3 different directions suddenly turned around without warning, galloping back the way they had come. Wang Chong immediately sensed something and soon turned his head in the direction of Tala's. A cloud of dust was approaching from that direction, the cavalry of the Qixi Protectorate Army. As they galloped forward, they divided into 4 groups. 3 of these groups went after the Turkic, Tibetan, and Arab scouts, while the remaining group galloped toward him. General Chang, what's wrong? Has something happened with the Western Turks? Wang Chong faintly smiled as he spotted the figures of Chang Qianli and Shi Yuanqing riding with the soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate Army. How did you know? Chang Qianli was stunned, not having expected Wang Chong to guess at the reason for his visit before he had even said anything. Haha, it's not hard to guess. Abu Muslim is fresh from defeat, and he certainly hasn't given up and is mobilizing soldiers from the rear. But he suffered such large losses that even Arabia in all its power will not be able to do much in just 4 or 5 days. As for Daluan Ruozan, he even dragged out the guards of the royal capital, the Mutri Great Cavalry. The Yusang Empire doesn't have any more soldiers to spare. The only one left is the Western Turks. My lord, speak. What has happened with Duwu Sili? Wang Chong faintly smiled. In his mouth, the complicated sounded exceedingly simple. After a few moments of silence, Chang Qianli quickly explained his reason for coming. The scouts have reported that after Wuxia obtained the formation phenomena, the Turks began to practice it night and day. Crucially, following the method described on those papers, they really did succeed in cultivating formation phenomena, and all of the soldiers have received significant boosts in strength. The deal with Wuxia had been decided entirely by Wang Chong. Neither Chang Qianli nor Gao Xianji knew the details. Chang Qianli did not doubt Wang Chong's abilities, but the scouts' reports over the last few days had made him rather uneasy. Wang Chong, you are sure that the contents of the letter were false? In the end, Chang Qianli could not suppress this question. The Great Tang and the Western Turks were in the middle of a war. Wuxia and Daluan Ruozhen might have retreated, but this was not a true retreat, and they were even barricading the roads to the east. Their intentions were plain and obvious. For the Western Turks to have gotten stronger from cultivating Wang Chong's fake formation phenomena was definitely not a good sign. Is that so? The Western Turks have already started to get stronger. To Chang Qianli's surprise, Wang Chong's eyes brightened in delight at these words, as if he had just heard some good news. This? Chang Qianli had wanted to ask a few more questions, but Wang Chong's reaction had left him speechless. Haha, Lord Chang, be at ease. It's not as easy as Wuxia thinks to cultivate true formation phenomena. In truth, he won't even be able to extract a few secrets of formation phenomena from cultivating that method. That road is simply not the road leading to the true formation phenomena. Wang Chong softly said, his expression confident and assured. This attitude of everything being planned out far ahead of time carried a convincing and persuasive power. Chang Qianli was dumbstruck. He had only come over in such a rush because he believed that there had been a major flaw in the plan. Chang Qianli was also an extremely experienced general. Moreover, he was also a somewhat outstanding strategist, not simply a pure fighting general. But in front of Wang Chong, Chang Qianli was forced to admit that his own schemes were completely inferior. He could not predict even a tiny facet of Wang Chong's schemes and methods.